artists that are mixing your own vocals, this is for you. I'm hearing a lot of incredible music coming out, but your vocal clarity is really suffering, and I'm here to help you. So let's just dive into this tutorial. I'm only going to share the most crucial tips for now. If people have more questions, I'll do more tutorials later. I pulled up this session in Ableton Live, and I picked this one because it's really loud. The louder something is, the harder it is to hold on to clarity. So we have this dance track. It's actually a cover of a classic rock song by Toto. It's a duet, but I'm just going to play the chorus real quick for reference. Admittedly, this isn't my best work, but I just threw it together real quick. To make this more accessible and simple, I'm just using strictly stock plugins. And you can absolutely get a pro mix on stock plugins if you really learn how to use your tools. This first tip of mine might sound basic to some of you, but the most important thing you can do is separate your mix into two main groups: instrument bus and a vocal bus. And this is absolutely important. Like, doing separate signal processing for these prevents frequencies from clashing together and getting distorted and phasing out. And the more complex your mix is, the more subgroups you should have to combine similar instruments for independent processing. Like, have guitars here and synths here, or background vocals. When you stage effects into smaller groups like this, it means they don't have to work as hard, there's less distortion, and they take up less space in the mix. Not only does that leave you more space for vocals, of course, but it leaves you a lot more dynamic sound, so you can make it louder. Now, let's go to this instrument bus here. On all of my buses, I use a gain reduction, and I won't get too deep into plugins since every mix is different, but it's a good idea to use gain reduction on the bus. It's just making sure you have enough headroom helps to lower the energy at the beginning of the effects chain here, so your compressors aren't like violently attacking your signal and causing muddiness and pressure and distortion that gets in the way of your vocals. Almost all of my buses have this general effects chain, though. It's a EQ first and multiple compressors to address different issues so they don't get overloaded, and then the limiter. Now, let's take a look at this EQ first. I'm using a mid-side EQ, so I can control the center of the mix separately. That's because your vocals are usually in the center of the mix. So if we switch from this to our mid channel, you can see I kind of scoop this out a little bit to give a little bit more room for the vocal clarity in there, because that's really where a lot of vocal information lies. You just kind of play around with it until you find what you need. But just use this as a last resort. Don't use this unless you ran out of other options. Now, we can switch over to this multiband, and I don't actually recommend multiband compressors for this bus, but sometimes if you have a really punchy mix or a harsh high end, a regular compressor will just drop the gain too aggressively, and it just feels like pressure in your ears. So this can shave off a little bit more of that surgically, and I'm telling you this because sometimes it's the only thing standing in the way of your vocal clarity, but don't get too aggressive with this. You can see my ratios here are super tame. The glue compressor is just a nice, soft, transparent smoothing effect with a limited range here. And then we have the limiter for extra loudness and controlling the rest of the transient spikes. I want to move over to this vocal bus for you. And what I want to recommend right off of the bat is that you stack your vocals. Like, record your main vocals, then take one step back from your mic and record multiple takes of the same thing, keeping your timing as tight as you can. Now, it's not right for every song, but it just sounds so much more professional than if you're trying to squash one vocal to get more presence out of it. And you can actually see here in this chorus, I stacked this with a female recording because it's a duet, and it just really filled it out. It just made the most sense to do that. Now let's go back to this this vocal bus here. It's pretty much the same as the instrumental bus, although normally it's a good idea to high pass your vocals, just in case there's any boominess that might interfere with the master. We're just carving out some final resonant frequencies and softly gluing all the vocals together. the limiter shouldn't be doing too much in the vocal bus. It's just catching random peaks, but it's important to catch those because if they get through to the master bus, it's going to drop the gain on the whole track, and you don't want that. So finally, we have a de-esser. I just use this at the end of the chain because at this point, all of your sibilances should be roughly the same level. And so it's just easier to set the threshold that way. I almost use the stock multiband compressor for this because it actually works really good and it takes almost no CPU up. I'll actually play this real quick so you can kind of see what I mean. Yeah, cool. Anyway, let's switch over to this main vocal group here. Now, for vocal tracks, try to keep your noise gates as relaxed as possible. Just slow attack and slow release, a long look ahead. If you're using pitch correction, actually, let's go over to here. I just have this little auto-tune feature on here, but do it before any of the effects that add color, like this saturator here. Only put it after a compressor if the incoming signal is really dynamic or really quiet. But sometimes using a limiter right after your EQ like this will help you shave off some occasional loud spikes that it's just so your compressor can be more relaxed and natural sounding. Use a slower attack and a fast release for this, so it's not affecting anything except for those spikes. I do like to use saturation though, or tubes on vocals. Not all the time, but it can help boost some presence and intensity. Then, of course, the limiter here. Let's get over to this background vocal group here. This is kind of the last tip. Just try to keep your backup vocals and harmonies out of the center of the mix where your main vocal is. Like, hard panning is generally a good option, but for multiple harmonies, you might want them grouped a little closer to the main vocal. If you want a cheap trick, though, you can use this to delay one of the channels to the left or right by a few milliseconds. And the more milliseconds you use, the more delay on that channel, the more spread out it's going to sound. And then I like to compress after a stereo effect. I think it sounds better, but tried both ways. And of course, limiter, de-esser always last. A little redundancy there, but when it's loud, it's important to have a little bit of redundancy, I think. And finally, let's check out the master bus. Other than maybe a little saturation or reverb, depending on the track, all we should really be doing here is the most subtle and minor adjustments to account for the two main signals coming together, and where you're just getting amplification from blending those signals. Sometimes they can cause a little resonance that needs attention, or a dynamic EQ for random little like anomalies. Just very gentle smoothing before going into the limiter. Now, the best way to check a balanced mix here is to solo each of your buses, the instrument bus. And what you should notice when you solo this is that you should get almost no activity on your limiter specifically. It really shouldn't be moving, so I'm actually just going to play it so you can check this out. Yeah, so it should really only be making gain reductions once the signals are combined together, but that's pretty much it. Now, most professional engineers will reduce the final volume of the track by 1 decibel. It's just to protect it from issues that can come up from file compression and streaming services. But I think that's it, guys. I hope that was helpful. If it was, send me your mix. I'd love to hear it. Good night.